The early morning light filtered weakly through the pines as Officer Daniel Hayes continued his patrol, his boots sinking into damp earth with every careful step. He had spent the last 6 months assigned to this section of Montana's northern wilderness, a region so remote that even radio signals struggled to find their way out. For most rangers, this isolation was punishment. For Daniel, it was peace, or at least it usually was. Today felt different. The air carried a weight he couldn't explain, a silence too deliberate to be natural. Years of experience had taught him that forests have moods, soft whispers before rain, sharp stillness before danger. Right now, this forest felt like it was holding its breath. He adjusted the strap of his rifle and scanned the tree line, eyes darting between shafts of golden light and shadow. His body moved on routine, but his instincts, the quiet voice that every seasoned ranger learns to respect, were screaming that something was off. Not a sound of birds, not a rustle in the brush, just the low hum of tension that pressed against his ears. Daniel paused near a clearing where he usually stopped to log his first report. North boundary secure, he murmured into the radio, but his own voice sounded strange in the stillness, like it didn't belong here. He glanced down at his tracks in the dew, fresh, clear, and solitary. No prints, but his own. As he took a sip from his canteen, a faint movement flickered in his peripheral vision. Something low to the ground, maybe 20 yards ahead. His hand instinctively went to the rifle, not in aggression but habit. He expected a deer, or maybe a fox. What he saw instead made his heart skip. Two small wolf pups stepped cautiously from the undergrowth. Their fur, mottled gray and white, glistened with moisture. Daniel froze. He knew the rules. Where there are pups, the mother is never far. But the forest remained deathly still. No sound of adult movement, no warning growl. Only those two tiny creatures standing side by side, watching him with haunting intelligence. One took a shaky step forward, then another, its eyes locked on his face. The other followed, hesitating, its ears pressed flat in fear, or maybe desperation. Daniel had seen wild animals before, even wounded ones, but nothing like this. There was something deliberate in the way they moved, as if they wanted him to notice. His breath fogged in the cold morning air as he whispered to himself, "What are you two doing out here alone?" The pups didn't run. They didn't snarl. Instead, the smaller one made a sound, a soft, pleading whimper that echoed through the silent forest. And for the first time in his career, Daniel Hayes felt the unmistakable sense that the wilderness itself was trying to tell him something. For several long seconds, Daniel stood frozen, unable to move. Every instinct screamed to back away slowly, report the sighting, and wait for backup. That was protocol. Never approach wolf pups, never risk an encounter with a mother nearby. But protocol didn't account for what he was seeing. The two pups were breaking every law of nature. Instead of retreating, they stepped closer, their paws crunching softly over fallen needles. Their eyes, too alert, too purposeful, never left him. The smaller one whimpered again, that same strange, aching sound that didn't belong to fear. It was closer to pleading. Daniel lowered his rifle, hands trembling just slightly. "Easy now," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind. The wolves didn't flinch. They seemed to understand his tone, responding with stillness, their little bodies quivering under the pale morning light. Something was very wrong. Their fur was clumped with dried mud, matted as if they'd been traveling for hours. No cubs this young would wander so far from their den, unless they were running from something. The smaller pup suddenly turned, glancing back toward the darker part of the forest. Then it looked at Daniel again and gave a short, sharp yelp. The other mirrored it, taking a few steps in the same direction before stopping to look back at him. They were trying to show him something. Daniel blinked, his mind racing. "No, that's not possible," he muttered, but deep down he knew what he was witnessing. It wasn't instinct, it was intent. He watched as they repeated the motion. A few steps forward, a look back, a pause. Again and again, each time more insistent, more desperate. The smaller one even lifted its front paw halfway, a gesture so strangely human that it sent chills down his spine. Against every bit of training, he took a slow step forward. Immediately, both pups perked up, tails flicking with hope. The smaller one yelped again and took off toward the trees, stopping every few feet to check that he was following. Daniel hesitated. If a mother was nearby, this could end badly. But his gut, the same gut that had saved his life more than once, told him this wasn't a trap. It was a call for help. He switched off his radio, unwilling to explain something even he didn't understand, and began to follow. The forest grew thicker with each step, branches closing in like dark curtains. Shafts of light broke through the canopy in narrow beams, illuminating floating dust motes that danced like tiny ghosts. The pups moved ahead with surprising purpose, never venturing too far, always pausing to make sure he kept up. Minutes turned into nearly half an hour. The silence pressed heavier now. No birds, no insects, just the faint sound of the pups padding ahead. Finally, Daniel crouched behind a fallen log to catch his breath. The pups stopped instantly, watching him. Their eyes, one a deep gold, the other pale gray, seemed filled with something that both frightened and amazed him, understanding. Then the smaller one whimpered again, softer this time, as if begging him not to stop. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle strap, exhaled deeply, and rose to his feet. "All right," he whispered. "Show me what you need to show me." The pups turned together and darted forward, their shapes vanishing into the mist. And somewhere deep inside that cold, breathless forest, Daniel Hayes realized he was no longer on patrol. He was being led. The deeper Daniel followed the pups into the wilderness, the more unreal it felt, like he was crossing into a part of the forest untouched by time. The air thickened, the scent of pine giving way to something metallic, faint but sharp, like old blood or rust. He slowed his pace, eyes scanning for movement. Yet the only things he saw were the two small figures weaving through the underbrush with uncanny precision. They moved as one leading, the other guarding. Every few minutes, they would stop, turn to him, and make sure he was still following. That strange awareness never faded. It wasn't random. It wasn't instinct. It was guidance. He'd seen animal intelligence before, but this was different. Daniel's mind drifted back to his first year as a ranger, when an old tracker had told him something he'd never forgotten. Nature watches us closer than we think. Sometimes, when it needs to, it speaks back. He had laughed then. He wasn't laughing now. They had been traveling for nearly an hour when the forest began to change. The pines grew denser, their trunks blackened as though touched by fire. Moss hung in thick curtains, muffling his footsteps. The pups slowed, their tails low, ears twitching at every sound. A strange energy pulsed through the air, stillness mixed with dread. Then he noticed something else. The ground here was disturbed, patches of mud pressed down by heavy tires, boot prints layered over animal tracks. It wasn't just wildlife out here. Humans had been here. Recently. Daniel's breath quickened. "What the hell?" he murmured, kneeling beside a deep indentation in the soil. The tread pattern looked military-grade, thick, wide, meant for off-road transport. His patrol zone was supposed to be clear of civilian activity. The smaller pup approached and gave a soft whine, pacing in circles near the tire marks, then darted toward a narrow ridge that dipped sharply downward. The second pup followed, pausing at the edge to look back at him with a sound that chilled him to the bone, a low, broken cry that didn't sound like an animal at all. It sounded like grief. Daniel climbed the ridge and froze at what lay below. A small clearing stretched out beneath the pines, and in the center, half concealed by shadows, lay the massive shape of a wolf. Its gray fur was darkened with blood, tangled in the cruel loops of metal wire snares. Around her, discarded cages, traps, and empty tranquilizer darts gleamed in the weak sunlight. The mother. His stomach twisted. She was alive, but barely. Her breaths came in ragged bursts, chest rising with visible effort. One eye fluttered open as her pups raced to her side, nuzzling her muzzle with whimpers that broke the silence. Daniel's throat tightened. The entire setup was deliberate, too neat, too organized. This wasn't an accident. It was a trap. He scanned the perimeter and found what he feared. Wooden crates marked with faded stencils, tools, rope, tranquilizer cases, all signs of poachers. Whoever had done this wasn't some amateur hunter. This was a professional operation. The smaller pup turned back to him, those golden eyes wide with pleading. It pawed the air once, twice, then pressed its tiny head against its mother's wound, as if showing him where she was hurt. The larger pup stood between them and the forest edge, watching, guarding, trembling with silent fear. Daniel's instincts roared in conflict. His training told him to radio for backup, secure the scene, and wait. But another part of him, something raw, something human, told him he didn't have time. The snares were cutting deep. She wouldn't last much longer. He crouched near the wolf, speaking softly. "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." The mother's single open, I shifted toward him. For a long, surreal moment, they just stared at each other, predator and man, bound by something beyond language. He saw no rage there, only exhaustion and trust. He reached for the wire, feeling its tension bite into his glove. Carefully, he used his knife to twist it loose. The metal snapped back with a sharp ping, and the wolf flinched but didn't fight. Her pups pressed closer, as though sensing what he was doing. Daniel worked fast, freeing one limb, then another. Each cut sent waves of adrenaline through him. His heart pounded in his ears. Every second felt stolen. Then voices, distant at first, but growing clearer. Male voices, laughing, talking casually. Daniel froze. The pups tensed, pressing against their mother. The sound was coming from the tree line, low, gruff, confident. He recognized that tone instantly. Not hikers, not locals, poachers. He ducked behind a fallen log, pulling the rifle from his shoulder as quietly as he could. Through a break in the brush, he spotted movement. 2 men carrying rifles, scanning the clearing with the ease of familiarity. They were coming back to check their traps. His pulse hammered. There was no time to escape, no way to call for backup without giving away his position. The wolf was half freed, her breathing shallow but steady. The pups looked at him with eyes that seemed to understand what came next. And in that moment, Daniel Hayes made a silent promise to them. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let their trust be wasted. Daniel's heart pounded like a drum against his chest as the 2 men stepped into the clearing. Their boots sank softly into the damp earth, their rifles hanging loose at their sides, too relaxed, too confident. They had done this before. The taller one, with a thick beard and faded camo jacket, spat into the dirt. "Told you she'd still be here," he said, his voice rough with certainty. "These wolves always come back for their young." The second man chuckled, adjusting the strap of a tranquilizer gun slung across his chest. "Good. That means we got the whole family this time. Boss will pay double for a live pack." Daniel's fists clenched. A live pack. The words made bile rise in his throat. He had seen the aftermath of poaching before, broken traps, bloody prints, but never the operation itself. These weren't random hunters. They were organized, efficient, and fearless enough to run this deep into federal land. From his cover behind the fallen log, he scanned the area quickly. 3 snares still held the mother wolf partially pinned, her body trembling in exhaustion. The pups were crouched low beside her, silent but alert, their eyes flicking between her and Daniel. He knew he had seconds to decide. If the poachers noticed movement, they'd shoot, first him, then the animals. The taller one stepped closer to the wolf, lowering his tranquilizer gun. Still breathing, he muttered, "Good girl. You're worth a fortune, sweetheart." That was enough. Daniel rose from cover, rifle raised. "Federal Ranger," he shouted. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground now." The forest exploded with motion. Both men spun toward him, startled but fast. The bearded one reached for his sidearm. Daniel fired once, a warning shot that tore through the dirt just inches from the man's boots. Birds erupted from the treetops, scattering into the gray sky. "I said down," Daniel roared. His voice was sharp, commanding, the kind of tone that came from years of patrols and near-death calls. The second man hesitated, eyes darting between Daniel's rifle and the still form of the wolf. "You don't want to do this," he hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Daniel took a step forward, fingers steady on the trigger. "Try me." For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the soft panting of the wolf and the trembling whimper of her pups. Then, from deeper in the woods, came the low rumble of an engine. Another vehicle. Daniel's stomach dropped. There were more of them. He turned slightly, scanning the tree line, and caught sight of a black ATV rolling through the brush. 2 more figures aboard, both armed. The odds shifted instantly. The taller poacher smirked. "Told you," he said. "You're outnumbered, Ranger." Daniel's training kicked in. He dropped to one knee behind the log, took a controlled breath, and fired at the ATV's front tire. The vehicle lurched sideways, crashing against a stump. The 2 men inside cursed, scrambling for cover. The clearing erupted into chaos. Shouts, gunfire, the metallic snap of traps shifting under tension. Daniel's world shrank to instinct and sound. He dove for the nearest tree, firing another round that clipped a branch above a poacher's head. The wolves didn't move. The mother lay still, her pups pressed against her flank, trusting him completely even as bullets tore through bark around them. One poacher tried to flank Daniel's position, his boots crunching through the leaves. Daniel pivoted, fired low, and dropped him with a shot to the shoulder. The man screamed, clutching the wound as his rifle fell uselessly. The taller man cursed and raised his tranquilizer gun, but Daniel was already moving. He tackled them hard, the 2 crashing into the dirt with a thud that shook the clearing. The gun went off, the dart whizzing harmlessly into the trees. Daniel pinned him down, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Who's your buyer?" he shouted. "Who's running this operation?" The man spat blood and laughed. "You think this ends with us? There's 10 more like this across the border. You can't stop it." Daniel's jaw tightened. He slammed the man's wrist into the ground, cuffing him with practiced speed. "Maybe not, but you're done." The forest fell quiet again, except for the soft sound of the pups whimpering beside their wounded mother. Daniel stood, breathing hard. 3 men were down, the one wounded on the ground, one unconscious from the crash, another cuffed beside the log. He quickly grabbed his radio and called for immediate backup, his voice sharp but steady. Ranger 12 requesting emergency response. Active poaching site located. 4 suspects detained, live wildlife injured. Coordinates transmitting now. He clipped the radio back to his vest and knelt beside the mother wolf. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Her golden eye flickered open again, and for a moment Daniel felt that she recognized him not as a threat, but as part of the same fight for survival. The smaller pup nudged her muzzle, then looked up at Daniel. The gesture was heartbreakingly familiar. It was the same movement it had made hours ago when it first found him. Only now he understood. They hadn't just been running for help. They'd been searching for someone they could trust. He used his knife to slice through the remaining wires, whispering softly, "It's okay now. You're safe." As the last snare snapped free, the mother wolf gave a low, rasping growl, not of warning, but relief. She lifted her head weakly, nuzzling each pup before turning her gaze toward Daniel one final time. Her eyes shone with something that felt impossible, recognition. Then she slumped back, exhausted but alive. The distant wail of sirens broke the silence as backup vehicles approached through the trees. Law enforcement officers poured into the clearing, their radios crackling with orders. The poachers were quickly restrained, their equipment seized. One officer approached Daniel, eyes wide at the sight before them. "What happened here?" Daniel just glanced at the wolves and exhaled. "They led me here," he said quietly. They knew. As the officers began photographing evidence, crates, traps, bloodstains, Daniel knelt one last time beside the wolf family. The pups stayed close to their mother, but neither showed fear of the humans moving around them. One even took a tentative step toward Daniel, sniffing his hand before retreating again. A medic crouched beside him. "She's lucky," he said, checking the wolf's wounds. "Another hour and she wouldn't have made it." Daniel nodded, his voice low. They saved her. When the convoy finally left the forest hours later, Daniel rode in the back of a rescue vehicle beside the wolves. The pups lay curled against their mother, eyes half closed in exhaustion. The mother lifted her head once, meeting Daniel's gaze through the steel mesh divider. No words were needed. She simply blinked, slow and steady, before closing her eyes again. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of the engine and the soft breathing of the rescued family, Daniel Hayes realized that sometimes survival isn't just about instinct. It's about trust. Weeks passed before Officer Daniel Hayes returned to that same stretch of forest. The air felt different now, alive again. Birdsong echoed through the pines, the quiet no longer heavy but peaceful. Where once there had been traps and bloodstains, now there was renewal. The poaching ring's arrest had sent shockwaves across the state. The documents found on site revealed a massive network stretching across two borders, one that had been silently destroying wildlife for years. Thanks to Daniel's report and the evidence gathered from that single clearing, the operation had been dismantled. Dozens of animals were rescued, dozens more finally safe. But the part that stayed with him wasn't the headlines. It was them. Wildlife officers had released the wolf family back into protected territory once the mother healed. They tagged her for monitoring, but she vanished into the wild within days. And yet, rangers began reporting strange encounters, brief glimpses of a gray she-wolf and her two grown pups watching from the ridgelines during patrols, never hostile, never afraid. Just watching. Daniel liked to believe they were checking in. On his last patrol of the season, he found something near the same spot where it had all begun. A single wolf paw print beside a human boot print in the mud, perfectly aligned. The sight made him pause, his throat tightening with quiet awe. Nature, he thought, had its own way of remembering. That night, as he sat by his cabin window, the moonlight spilling across the forest canopy, he replayed the moment those pups first appeared through the mist, their desperate eyes, their unspoken plea. Every part of it had defied logic, yet every part had been real. They hadn't just trusted him. They had believed in him. Daniel smiled faintly. Yes, you kept your promise, he whispered to the dark woods outside. Somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the soft, echoing howl of a wolf, long, low, and filled with life. And though he couldn't see them, Daniel knew they were out there, wild and free, the family that had changed everything. Because sometimes the purest form of intelligence isn't spoken in words or measured in science. Sometimes it's found in the courage to seek help, and in the heart that chooses to answer.